Hi everyone, this is William with the Grand Duke Dmitri 1917 diary entry. My dog is kind of restless and whiny at the moment, so hopefully he won't prove to be a disruption. There goes the little one. Okay, so we are in the second section of the long diary entry of 29th October 1917, which was a Sunday. And in the previous first section of that long diary entry, Dmitri had described the shock of the Bolshevik takeover. On the one hand, everybody was anticipating something exactly of that kind, but on the other hand, you can anticipate as much as you want, and yet when it actually happens, it still is shocking. It was shocking for the whole world, not just for Russians or Dmitri. So he talked about his anxiety for his loved ones, very natural. He hadn't heard a word from any of them. He didn't know what was going on. And then, very interesting, he switched to an analytic tone, a really kind of detached analytic tone, and almost with an element of enjoyment. And I'm not saying that in any way as a criticism of him. Any of you who, like myself, enjoy the kind of chess game aspect of looking at historical events or current events as they happen, thinking about, well, how is this going to play out? And what are the factors? You can get caught up in that. And he really does, because that's something that he loved. Best case scenario, he would have been able to have some kind of role in the Corps of Diplomats, or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or something like that, if everything had gone well, if there hadn't been a revolution, or if he'd been able to find such a position in exile. He would have absolutely thrived, because that was really what he loved. And he was an astute observer, and what he has to say is always intelligent and interesting. All right, now one idea that he puts out there initially is that maybe this is a good thing. Maybe things have now escalated to the point that people will come to their senses and realize that the Bolsheviks are horrible, and and there will be so much pushback that things will go back to the way they were, at least with the provisional government. All right, and so when he uses the word reaction in this next section, he's using it not in the general sense of, for instance, I was surprised at her reaction to the movie, but in the political sense that usually we think of reaction and reactionaries coming from the right, but in this instance it would be anybody to the right of the Bolsheviks, not just monarchists, but even socialist revolutionaries. So when he uses the word reaction, it's in that sense. It's in the sense of pushback against the Bolsheviks. All right, so let's get going. My personal conviction is that sooner or later the struggle of the proletariat for power had to begin. There is an excellent saying which our revolution has justified, to wit, that revolution devours its children. That is exactly what is happening now. But so far the information is rather contradictory. One version says that Kerensky has been arrested, another that he has fled to Stavka, a third that Kerensky is trying, with the help of troops summoned from the front, to put down the Bolshevik uprising in the capital. From that last information, it seems that he is free and active in Petrograd. Personally, I think that's false, because the Maximalists would naturally start their arrests with Kerensky. Despite the fact that, according to theory, such a clash had to occur and the power struggle was inevitable, despite the fact that, as many say, the earlier the sharp break between the revolutionary camps, the better, despite all that, I personally think that if the Bolsheviks hold on to power for 10 to 20 days, the result will be so lamentable that not even the help of the strongest possible reaction will be able to save the situation. I want to note that the program laid out by Lenin, who, if one believes Reuters, is the main active figure in Petrograd, ends with the conclusion of peace with full blank, etc. Now, if the fleet is on the side of the Bolsheviks, then it will, of course, go over to the Germans or will not attack. The very same thing will happen on the front, and if the Germans don't develop big operations, they will at least seize the points they need in a strategic sense, for instance, Dvinsk. Then it's clear that although paper rubles and the money supply belong to the state bank, they will be blank. This is a whole almost line that I can't make out. And then the factory's blank. In short, so much harm will be done that it will be difficult to save anything. Of course, if reaction, even if it's not pro-monarchist but simply nationalistic, flares up, then that will be a little better. It will now be interesting to see the attitude of other countries to what happens, especially if the Bolsheviks establish a cabinet and begin to implement their conditions and program. Some kind of inner voice is telling me that all this is for the best, and this is the last ordeal. Only let the Lord God keep my dear one safe. There's something that I didn't note, this desire on his part to see how other countries react. And, that's part of this analytic chess match kind of mindset. I like that about him. Okay, he begins with this comment that revolutions devour their children. And this was something that was said during the French Revolution, I believe, by a journalist by the name of Jacques Mallet Dupin. I don't simply know such things. I had to look that up. Dmitri had obviously heard it, either before the revolution or he had come across it. It probably was something people were citing at that time. I would love to have a long conversation to do a whole video on that idea of revolution devouring its children. I tend to look at it that way myself. I mean, the American Revolution did not, but one could argue that it wasn't so much a revolution as a fight against a sort of almost occupying force. Anyway, if I did do a video on that, I don't think anybody would watch it. But this is a revolution. The Russian Revolution was certainly one that devoured its children. Okay, Dmitri has heard different things about Kerensky. He's quite right that Kerensky was a figure that the Bolsheviks would want to grab immediately, but they didn't manage it. And in fact, I had a look. This is from a quote from Wikipedia. Kerensky escaped the Bolsheviks and fled to Pskov, where he rallied some loyal troops for an attempt to retake the city. His troops managed to capture Tsarskaya Selo, but were beaten the next day at Pulkovo. Kerensky narrowly escaped, and he spent the next few weeks in hiding before fleeing the country, eventually arriving in France. So there you go. This rumor that Kerensky had gathered troops and was going to try to take the capital back from the Bolsheviks was actually based on fact. He took Tsarskaya Selo. I didn't know that. I found that very interesting. Okay, anyway, what is our next topic? So this assessment on Dmitri's part that so much damage will be done in less than 3 weeks that there won't be any recovery, any possibility of recovery. Well, that's very interesting because it flies in the face of his speculation and what he even continues to say about, well, maybe this is a good thing. And, he's right. I don't know if it was in the first 3 weeks, but there certainly is a point in situations like this where it's foolish to say, well, the worse things get, the better, because there is a point of no return where simply too much damage has been done. And apparently there's sort of an instinct telling him, wow, this is so bad that in less than 3 weeks, we're going to reach that point of no return. But then he kind of contradicts himself elsewhere. Well, that's a very common human thing to do. It's interesting that it's his first mention of Lenin. Lenin kind of wasn't on the radar screen before. The revolution was all about the provisional government, the coup by the general staff officers who got Nicholas to abdicate. And Dmitri wasn't following the revolutionary movement. As far as I know, he never mentions it in his 1915 diary. Maybe he was later. But he refers to Reuters, which is, clearly where he's getting most of his information, and says that Lenin is apparently the one in charge, according to Lenin. And then he cites Lenin's program. And again, I don't think he would have been familiar with Lenin's program. I don't think he would have been reading Lenin prior to the revolution, or prior to the Bolshevik revolution. But that information would suddenly have become available. The newspapers and various sources would be saying, well, here's Lenin's program, here's what he's laid out in the past. So Dmitri had a look at it, obviously. So it's just, it interests me so much that he's able to take a step back and be very analytic and look at all the factors, all the possibilities, what will happen with the fleet, what will happen in relation to the Germans, how will other countries react. Very interesting that he does that, and so interesting that he then throws in this almost throwaway line at the end. It will be, when he talks about an inner voice. Some kind of inner voice is telling me that all this is for the best and this is the last ordeal. Okay, so this is intuition, not the analytic side, but the intuitive side, if you use Jungian terms. To me, what it is, however, is, flashing red lights. This is how I'm able to not go out of my mind, by referring to, but I have an inner voice that's telling me everything's going to be all right. So at this time, there's a parallel diary, a parallel volume where he's talking about this sort of intense spiritual seeking that he's doing with esoteric religion. And so he's even doing mantras every day. And, so this is how he is surviving, to put it bluntly. This is how he's keeping himself from having a nervous breakdown. So it's so interesting that this is then tacked on at the end of this very, very analytic section. And this is what is allowing him to have that enough detachment to do an analysis. Then, of course, very natural, the same thing any of us would say, let the Lord God keep my dear ones safe, exclamation point. So what do we have next time? Well, really interesting. Dmitri will be supplying us with a body metaphor for what is going on in Russia. He will relate it to a specific kind of bodily illness or abnormality, however you want to put it. He was a sharp and interesting person. So, for sure come back for that, and I'll see you then. Bye.